I had this cool retro piece that I thought was handmade and had really good bones, but I just felt it needed a little bit of colour. So what I started by doing was mixing these three colours, Rebel Yellow, Kudzu and Sandbar. I felt like I wanted an earthy tone for this piece, so I also added in some Plum Crazy, which might seem a little strange. However, this is on the opposite end of the colour wheel to green, which means when it's used, when mixing colours, it can really tone down greens. Before I got to painting, I removed the hardware from this piece. Some pieces I like to paint the hardware, but on this particular occasion I decided to remove it. I found the dark colour of this piece quite distracting, so before I painted on my green, I actually painted a base coat of French linen, which is kind of a grey beige colour. It's quite grey, but with a little bit of warm beige in it as well. I painted the whole piece in one base coat of this. I also used different brush strokes, some up, some down, some left, some right, and that is because I wanted to create a little bit of texture. Here's the green that I mixed earlier. It's a little bit earthy, it's quite cool. Let's see how it applies. So just like I did with the base coat of French linen, I apply one coat of this all over the piece except the edges. The edges I'm leaving because I'm painting them in a different colour, and I'm happy to go in different brush strokes again just to create more texture. You know, shelves are kind of one of the hardest things to paint, and I will die by that sword. I don't know why, but I just feel like they're always really fiddly, you know, especially when you've got to get to the ceiling of a shelf. But they do look great painted, I have to say. Okay, and this is how it's looking. I'm a little bit sorry about the light, guys. One of my softboxes blew on me, which means I was down to one softbox on the overhead lights, and that's not always great for lighting, but you kinda can get the gist of how it's looking from this. Except I decided I didn't actually really like it. The green was a little bit too cool, so here's what I did next. Yeah, I got some holy guacamole. I poured a little bit into my tub, and then I watered it down with probably about a 50% solution of water to paint. Then I applied the watered down holy guacamole to the shelves. Again, I'm completely avoiding the outer areas, you know, the frame of the piece and the door. Then I found some paper. Some newspaper would work absolutely fine, and I crinkled it up. And then I began to tap, and I believe this technique is called ragging, and what this does is it just creates texture and it helps a piece look kind of old. I also sprayed some water as I was doing this because every now and then I felt like the paint had gotten a little bit too thick, or it was a little bit thick in some areas, and yeah, anyway, so if it was feeling a bit thick, and I just sprayed it with water. When you do the top sections, you might find that it drips down onto the bottom, and that's absolutely fine. Just get your rag and tap it again. You know, painting is sometimes about problem solving, and sometimes it's about intuition. So sometimes you have a plan that doesn't always go to plan, and then you have to figure it out. And that's kind of what I'm showing you guys here, because that's what happened to me. My plan didn't quite work out as I expected because the colour that I made wasn't quite what I wanted. Just to add in some different texture, I got my chip brush and just dabbed that in some areas. The technique's called stippling, and this again, it's just to create different textures. It builds that texture up, and it just makes it look older and a little bit more rustic. And you know, I didn't get too caught up in it because in how I was applying it, because the idea was that it's meant to be imperfect anyway. So it was just fun to have a little play around. Next, I used a colour called Muscadine Wine, and this is kind of a burgundy colour with a fair amount of brown in it. And I painted this all around the edges or the frame of whatever you want to call it. So basically I painted around the edges in this colour. I decided to do a little bit of blending on the door. So what I did is I firstly applied my Muscadine Wine in the middle, and you can see I'm kind of just roughly placing it out there, not thinking too much about it, but I know I wanted like a really soft circular type of blend, if that makes sense. And the colour that I apply in the middle is Sawmill Gravy. And around the edges I applied Midnight Sky, which is kind of a black with a blue tinge to it. It's like a blue-black. It doesn't really matter what brush you use for this part of the application. However, for the blending here, I absolutely love the oval medium brush. This is a synthetic brush in an oval shape, and it creates a lovely soft smoky blend. So I'm using circular movements as I'm blending this, and then I'm blending left and up and down, and I'm just trying to get a really, really soft blend. I don't want any harsh edges because I want it to look a little bit like a spotlight or a vignette, you know. I just want it to create some depth. Guys, I'm still not happy with the colour. So next up in this lineup is Van Dyke Brown Glaze. Okay, maybe not with the hair though. I'm trying to get an earthy colour here and it's just too bright. So I spray loads of water. Then I begin to apply my glaze, making sure to keep it nice and moving. I definitely don't want thick glaze here because I don't want the brown glaze to overtake it. However, what the brown glaze will do is it will age it some more and it will really tone this green down. Like, I kind of wanted an olive colour to start with and it's just not happening. Like, I wanted an earthy green and it's not happening. So again, I'm problem solving and I really think the Van Dyke Brown glaze is going to help me fix this, but I just need to be careful with it. Like, I want to make sure that I'm building it up slowly rather than just going in there with too much of it. I am also using the synthetic mini brush for this because synthetic brushes are great for creating softer looks and reducing brush strokes. Just to show you the difference, here's Van Dyke Brown Glaze and there was the look before, so you can kind of see that it is starting to age and tone it down just a little bit. Okay, and now for the fun part. With a chalk pen, I decided to draw on some outlines for some folk art. So if you guys have followed me now for a while, you know I'm trying to teach myself folk art. And usually I just freehand it, but on this occasion I wanted to draw out a very rough outline for it. And the reason I'm using a chalk pen is because they can be easily removed afterwards. One real quick minor frustration that I want to point out is that this piece looks like it is constantly having like bristles or hairs stuck in the paint, but actually it was just the wood underneath. The wood underneath was very, very imperfect and it had lots of nicks and, you know, just interesting stuff like that going on. So while I was painting this piece, I really thought there was hairs everywhere and there wasn't. Now that I've finished my rough outline, I begin painting and basically colouring in this piece, and I start with Cobalt Blue, which is this lovely vibrant blue, and I mix in a little bit of Dusty Blue and Sawmill Gravy, and then I move on to the leaves, which is Evergreen and is mixed with some holy guacamole, and I am really trying to learn how to shade here. I mean, I've shaded a lot before with different paints in different styles, but I'm really trying to learn how to shade folk art. I am also using a brown colour called Chocolate to shade this a little bit to create more depth. And really with this kind of folk art, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to just be able to do one brush stroke and finished and great, it's all done. But I'm not quite there yet, and I wasn't sure if it was just practice that I need or if it's because it's with chalk paints and it's a lot easier to do with acrylics and oils. But I was finding sometimes the brush strokes weren't going to plan, so I had to kind of mix it up a little bit and just do some of my own strokes and also go back and blend a little bit in some areas, but I still think it worked out quite well. Next up, I'm using the cotton colour and I'm mixing in just a tiny little bit of the Cobalt Blue with it because I like that the blue is going to contrast nicely with the red underneath, well, with the burgundy colour, and also it's going to create a little bit of shading. Again, I'm trying to practice my brush strokes here, guys. If I remember rightly, this brush stroke that I'm using on the petals is called a C stroke. And you're meant to have a couple of colours like side loaded when you use it. However, it still didn't quite work out for me, so I had to go in afterwards and I had to just add in a little bit of brown, a little bit of the chocolate, just to create more shading because obviously I want some depth to this. I then painted the inside of the petals. I can't remember what part of that flower is called, but yeah, so I added yellow to the middle of the flowers. It was a colour called Colonel Mustard, and then round the edges using a detail brush I painted a little bit of my black, which is Midnight Sky. And then basically began colouring in all of the flowers and tried to practice some of the folk art strokes while I did it, and I wasn't beating myself up too much if I wasn't quite getting it right. I guess I should probably get a paint pad and I should just practice some of these strokes, but you know, it's quite fun just to do it live in the sense of like just to do it straight onto furniture, because hey, if it doesn't work out well then I can always just, you know, fix it if I need to, or just adapt a little bit, because art through history, no matter how rigid it might seem, it has never been rigid. I mean, folk art is probably the most popular form of art through history, and believe it or not, there's been more painted folk art furniture through history than non-painted, which is what a lot of people don't realise. And it started out with just people wanting to decorate, you know, their furniture in their home with stuff that they can paint. Eventually, when it came to Europe, they became like masters at it, and it became something that was really popular, and it was done all perfectly and expertly. But really, at its core, folk art and furniture painting and art in general should be something that's expressive and not thought about too much. And when I say that, I don't mean be thoughtless about it. Of course, it deserves lots and lots of thought, and it deserves a lot of creative planning, shall we say. But what I mean is don't get caught up in the details and it being like absolutely perfect and symmetrical and everything blended beautifully, because that just isn't the way it has to be, and if you've never painted it before, then that doesn't matter either. Like, I am teaching myself something new here. I'm using colours that are completely out of my comfort zone, brush strokes that are completely out of my comfort zone, but it's fun to learn and it's fun to try. And even though I may not be a master at this kind of style yet, that doesn't matter, because I still feel like I'm creating something quite pretty and unique. Okay, next up it's time to seal this piece, and I use Dixie Belle's Best Dang Wax in clear for that. And this is a lovely soft wax, and I'm using the Belle brush, which is one of my favourite wax brushes, and I apply this in sections, and I really work that wax into the paint and into the grain. And what will happen is that the paint will soak in the wax and the wax will harden, and then ultimately it will protect the paint. I am going to be going in with white wax over the top here, which is a decorative wax, and I feel it's always better to use a clear wax as a foundation before going in with any decorative waxes anyway. So I'm working in sections, and that's to make sure that the clear wax doesn't completely soak in before I'm ready to use my decorative wax. Right, so I've done that first shelf and it's time for the white wax, and they do look kind of similar, but I promise you they are very different waxes. White wax is great for softening colour and for giving that kind of pastel effect, like maybe it's been bleached a little bit and the colour's softened. And the reason why I like to have the clear wax underneath is because the clear wax is already soaked into the paint and the white wax is going to settle a little bit more on top, meaning that I'm not getting this kind of unevenness where the white wax is soaking in first and hardening, and then, does that make sense? It also means that I can use a clear wax as an eraser if I need to. I can use a clear wax to remove some of the white wax, but hopefully now you can kind of see the difference. Like, the bottom shelf has the white wax on it, and the one up against the wall is still it's just got clear wax, so it's looking completely different, and it is really softening this colour up, which is the look that I definitely want. I never wanted a bright colour for this piece. I usually like to leave my wax on for at most a day, but sometimes I'll leave it on just for as little as maybe half an hour, and I just let it all soak in. And then if there's any excess on top, then I like to get a lint-free rag and I like to wipe off any excess, because the wood can only soak in so much wax before the wax then just sits on top. I then sealed the rest of the piece with the clear wax, but then I dipped a rag in black wax and I just put a little bit of this around the edges. So do you remember that kind of vignette look that I was looking for earlier with the blending? I just added to this a little bit by using the black wax, and I was just darkening the edges because I thought it would look really pretty to create some more shadows on the flowers. So to make it look like it was all dark and moody around the flowers, and then to feel like the flowers had like a spotlight on them and they were really centre of attention. I'm about to show you guys the finished look, but let's remember this is how it looked before. And here is the after. It is such a dramatic transformation, and while it caused me definitely a fair few headaches, I really love the outcome of it. Also, all of the paints that I've used today are listed in the description below. I do earn a little bit of commission if you buy from those links, but they are only available for the US. This piece is available on my website to purchase, and you can also find a local retailer in the UK. I'd love to know what you guys thought of this project today, and I'd love to hear whether or not you've had any paint issues too. Like pieces that just throw out problems there that you have to deal with. And as always, guys, have a lovely day and have a really fun time painting. Bye bye.